Morning. So I got a question for everybody today. Everyone is into social justice these days. Uh, there's a lot going on with that. First and foremost, justice isn't burning things and destroying things when you don't get your way. That's not justice. That's vengeance. Vengeance and justice are not the same. They don't live on the same street. They don't hang out. They don't have Sunday brunch together. They're totally different. And if you don't know what those two words mean, then I suggest getting on Google and looking that up because, again, you need to know the difference. Secondly, all right, let's say you know the difference between those two words, but you're just upset because things aren't going your way. When is enough? This is a tremendously important question. How do you know when you've achieved your goal of social justice? What are the indicators that things are better? How do you know when your protests have reduced racism to an acceptable level? What is an acceptable level of racism? How do you measure how much racism is in our country and each individual person? How do you know? How do you know that police are prejudiced against this group and that you've decreased that in your protesting and your rioting and your general whatever it is you're doing, whether it's kneeling, holding a fist up in the air, walking around with signs up in the air, yelling on the internet, whatever it is? How do you know when that problem is solved? Do you have a database somewhere that shows you how many black men have been assaulted by police, how many white men have been assaulted by police, Asian men, Hispanic men, what the crimes were for each of those different people and how they were treated? Do the crimes coincide? You know, if they did this certain crime, was the different races of people treated equally in those different scenarios, or was one color or race of person treated differently under that certain crime? That's another thing we forget to look at. Right now, they're only looking at black people and what happens to black people, but we're missing the big picture. That's only a small portion of what's happening here. I mean, is it equal? It's easy to say, yeah, there's some black people that have been brutalized by police officers. That's no doubt. Whether, and again, I'm not going to discuss whether it was deserved, it was necessary, it was needed, or it wasn't, because that's another story for another day. And if you're into justice, that's for a court of law to decide, as well as a group of your peers and mine called a jury to listen to all the evidence, not just a 2 second excerpt from a video on YouTube, but all of the evidence, and decide if that person is guilty of the crime is charged, or whether, you know, they were justified, or whatever the case may be. That's, you know, that's another story for another day. But the story is here is, how do you know when you've accomplished your goal? When will you stop marching? When will you stop protesting? When will the rioting stop? When will Colin Kaepernick stop, you know, putting all this nonsense on the internet about what a victim he is and all that stuff? When will all that stop? How will you know when it's better? That's the question I have for you. How will you know when it's better? If it got better, could you tell? If it wasn't as bad as you think it is, could you tell? Is there any way you could statistically prove that things are worse than the normal person thinks they are, or that things maybe aren't as bad as you think they are, or things have improved in this sect of living or that, or maybe in this, you know, whatever? You know, is there any way you can statistically prove that you've made any impact in anything that you've been doing if you are protesting or rioting? And with that said, is there any way that you could ever stop now? Because I don't see any way of proving that social justice is doing anything. I don't see any way in proving whether your cause is accomplishing anything, whether it's actually pushing people further apart, which is my theory. You know, the more you come to town and burn stuff and throw stuff and march around with signs, the more uncomfortable you make the other people that are there. And as soon as people become uncomfortable with one another, it divides them, and they start looking at each other as if they're criminals or as if they're victims. And as soon as we have victims and criminals, all of a sudden we can't get along. And it doesn't really matter what color our skin is. You know, if I had 12 white people with signs in front of my house marching with megaphones and yelling and saying all kinds of nonsense, I wouldn't be real happy with that. I would be a little threatened by their presence, because they would be, you know, on my property. They would be a threat to me and my family, and I would be waiting to see what they were capable of, especially seeing all the things that have happened. You know, are these the burn it down people, or are these the Hare Krishna people that are just looking to bring light to a social cause? You know, you don't know that until rubber hits the road, and unfortunately it's usually too late there if it's the burn them down kind. You know that when your house or your business or your city is on fire. So there's no way to tell ahead of time. But it's not really a black and white thing. Matter of fact, I see more white people doing these protests than I do black people by a significant amount, maybe just because of where I live. And the people that are in my general area, I don't know. But I definitely, when I turn on the television, when I look out in the city, it's all white people for the most part that are upset about how other white people treat black people. Let's also bring up the fact that we're totally ignoring the Hispanics and the Asians. You know, they haven't had easy lives either. Look at what the Chinese have gone through in their history with the U.S., coming over here, building the railroads for next to nothing, just about slaves. Not quite, but about as close as you can get without actually being that. And then we kicked them out of the country and wouldn't even let them come and live here. What about the Native Americans? Look what our history has done with them. You know, we have not been kind to them, and I don't know that we are now. I don't really know how that works in today's time, but I know in history, not so good. What about the Hispanics? You know, they flocked here for opportunity, and we all took advantage of them by paying them a fraction of what we would pay an American to do the same job. And they happily took that pay so they could be here, because this country is so much better than where they came from. You know, they would come here and make $5 an hour, because if they stayed in Mexico or South America, if they could find work, and if they could find work that wasn't in the drug trade, they weren't going to make near that, not even close to it. So they come here and they're happy to get ripped off on low wages. Now what's happened is we brought all the Hispanics here and we trained them through paying them poor wages to do all the jobs we don't want to do. And now they've become experts. And guess what? They don't work super cheap anymore. They're asking for a decent wage just like everyone else should. So, you know, they're getting ignored in all this. All we talk about is black and white. Like we're the only two groups of people that live here, right? It just makes absolutely no sense. So if you're doing all the protesting, if you're upset about race relations, first off, don't be part of the problem. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. Treat people right. Be nice. Be kind. Don't look down on people, and don't think you're better because if you think you're better because you're a social justice warrior and somebody else is not, what's the difference between you and a racist that doesn't like somebody because of the color of their skin, and you don't like somebody because the social activities they do or don't do? There's not a lot of difference between the two if you're catching that parallel there. So be a part of the solution and just knock the nonsense off. If you can prove to me that what you're doing has an end goal, there's something that you can accomplish and you can see it, log it, and prove it, then do it. Keep doing it. Keep going. You're changing the world. Keep it up. But if you're just going out and being silly and you're just doing stuff because it makes you feel good and it makes you feel like you're helping other people while you're really not doing anything, then stop. Because you will not be able to prove what you're doing is helping anybody. It's probably not. It's probably causing further divide. I'm just going to put that out there. But no matter whether I'm right or whether you're right, you can't prove it. I can't prove it. You can't prove it. That means it's improvable. That means there's no way that you can say, I've done it. I've done it. I've freed the people. I've ceased social injustice. There's no more police violence. There's no more this. There's no more that. You can't prove that. So you're working towards a goal that has no end, and it actually isn't a goal. It's just the thing that you have to do indefinitely the rest of your life, because these issues are always, in some shape, form, or fashion, going to exist. So, social warriors, you're in for a long ride, because you really have to do this the rest of your life, because we're not ever going to transform into a peaceful utopia where we all hug each other and love each other and get along and all that. There's always going to be disdain. There's always going to be dislike. There's always going to be prejudice. There's always going to be racism. Now, hopefully, all those things will be minimum as possible, but they're always going to be there. So if you're a social warrior, enjoy your life of protesting for the rest of it, because you're going to be shouting power to the people on your deathbed with your fist up and your oxygen thing across your nose, because, again, it's not a provable thing. There's no way you can say I did it or I didn't do it. There's no way to say I'm making a difference and things are changing. There's no way. So be nice to people. Be kind. Bring people together. Quit causing divide. And quit chasing dreams that have no goal behind them and no measurable way to see if you're actually doing anything for the betterment of mankind. All right, that's it. This was a little longer than I expected. But anyway,